Okay. The in regard, it's the second day HaOmer Pesach. It's the Yahrzeit of my uncle, of Yosef Soloveitchik, probably the teacher of the generation. And I'll say some Divrei Torah based on things that he said, and at the end I would like to say a few words, in a sense, looking back, and to a certain degree looking forward. The famous shita of the Bahag in regard to Sefiras HaOmer is that if a person forgot to count Sefira at night, so in the day, you count Sefira without a bracha. And then the following night, you could count with a bracha. And the question is, does he hold that there's a mitzvah to count in the day? So then when you count in the day, you should also be able to make a bracha. And I know there are many pshatim. I want to save some time. But the way my uncle explained it, and that's the way I heard it from my father also, it's not that the Bahag Shita is that if you miss a full day, you no longer have the mitzvah, because all 49 days are part of one mitzvah. But the explanation is each day, even according to the Bahag, that once you miss a day, you no longer count, there is no mitzvah of counting anymore. So even if you miss a day, nevertheless, even if you miss a day, you do no longer a mitzvah, but each day is a separate bracha. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's a count. But let's say one counts 1, 2, 3, and skips 4, and then he gets to 5. So, and then he counts 5 without having counted 4. So 5 is not a count, certainly not a complete count. So if once one day is completely not counted, there is no longer a mitzvah. But up to the point that you counted, up to the point where you missed a day, you fulfill the mitzvah each day. The mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, the mitzvah of counting the Omer, is counting each day. But once you miss one day, the count ceases. But up to that point, you did have a count. My uncle mentioned that there was a certain person who the doctors told him he had, let's say, 2 weeks to live. So he knew he wouldn't finish the count of Sefiras HaOmer, or at least he assumed that he wouldn't finish the count of Sefiras HaOmer. So he didn't make a bracha because he was concerned that maybe all the days are one mitzvah, and if he misses a day, if he'll miss the last 5 weeks of Sefiras HaOmer, so it will turn out that all the brachas that he made in the first 2 weeks were in vain. But my uncle said that's not the case. Each day is a separate mitzvah. Why don't you continue counting once you missed a day? Because afterwards it's no longer considered a count or a full count. So that's the shita. So then why? So why does the Bahag say that in the day you count, if you forgot to count at night, in the day you count without a bracha? Because the mitzvah is counting at night. The mitzvah is to count at night. And in the day, if you count, you do not fulfill a mitzvah. But when you count in the day is counted. So therefore, the following night, you could count with a bracha. Because when you count in the day, although you did not fulfill a mitzvah on that day per se, but the count continued. And once the count continued, all future days are considered a count as well. And my uncle said, use that to explain the opinion of Rav Sadia Gaon. Rav Sadia Gaon says that so long as a person counted the first day, even if he missed, let's say, 10 days, and then he's counting on the 12th day, so he still has a mitzvah. But if he misses the first day, then he no longer has a mitzvah. Why is it? Because Rav Sadia Gaon's opinion, my uncle said, is that each day is a mitzvah counting, and each day is a separate mitzvah, according to Rav Sadia Gaon. But you have to count from the first day. So even Rav Sadia Gaon's opinion is, let's say on the 10th day you count, you're saying today is 10 days from the first day. So the count would be valid if you counted on the first day. But if you didn't count on the first day, so then the count is not valid. And Rav Hagaon also, Rav Hagaon said that, let's say somebody misses one day. He missed the 5th day, and now he counted 1, 2, 3, and 4. And he misses the 5th day. And he's counting on the 6th day at night. So he should say, Esmol Haya, yesterday was 5, today is 6. So the question is, what does he gain by saying yesterday was 5? He certainly can't fulfill the mitzvah on the next day, counting the previous day. So my uncle said, he can't fulfill the mitzvah, but the next day, if he missed only one day, and the next day he counts, and he makes mention of the fact that the previous day was the 5th day. So it says yesterday was the 5th day, today is the 6th, so the 6th is considered a count. So it's all, so in other words, each day is a separate mitzvah, but each day it has to be a count. And depending on the opinion, there are certain circumstances that prevent later days from being considered a count. And there are certain circumstances that allow, even where you didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly, but allow the following days to be considered a count. Now, the truth of the matter is that the opinion of Rav Sadia Gaon that you could count so long as you count the first day could be explained differently. In other words, because those who say that if you miss a day, you continue counting. So the question is, it's no longer a count. So how can you continue counting? So my uncle explained, based on an expression in the chinuch, that the mitzvah of counting Sefira is a mitzvah of joining the count of the Jewish people. So even if you miss a day, the count of the Jewish people continues. So I can, even if I missed a day, the count continues because the Jewish people counted, and I am counting as part of the Jewish people. So that's why the count continues. We could suggest to explain the opinion of Rav Sadia Gaon that so long as you counted the first day, so long as you counted the first day, even if you miss other days, you still have a mitzvah of Sefira because it's the first day that makes you part of the count of the Jewish people. But if you don't count on the first day, so in a sense, you're not part of the count of the Jewish people. You have to begin with the Jewish people in order to be part of their count. So that would be an alternative explanation to what my uncle said. However, my uncle mentioned the Machzavitri, mentioning something from Rashi. Rashi says that, let's say, you're davening together with the minyan, and the minyan is davening Ma'ariv early. And because they're davening Ma'ariv early, they're going to count Sefira early. It's before nightfall. It might even be before sunset. It's after Plag HaMincha, which is an early, a late part of the day where one can already start davening Ma'ariv, davening the evening services. So Rashi says, you can count with them, even though it's not yet nightfall. And you can say like this, but you should not make a bracha, and you should stipulate that if I remember to count, so the count, that will be my count. But I'll count with a bracha in the evening. But if not, I fulfill the mitzvah now. I am fulfilling the mitzvah now with the count that I'm doing now without the bracha. And the question everybody asks against Rashi is, if he is actually fulfilling the mitzvah now, so why can't he make a bracha now? And if he's not fulfilling the mitzvah now, so and that is what enables him to make the bracha later. So why should he count now? And more than that, once he counts now, the bracha that he makes later would be a bracha that was not necessary because he already fulfilled the mitzvah. So what is gained? What is gained by counting without a bracha? Counting without a bracha early on, and then counting later with a bracha. Now, so my uncle explained it along the lines that he explained the Baha'i, but a little different. He says like this. He says, from Plag HaMincha, in a sense, the Plag HaMincha is associated with the next day. So when you're standing at Plag HaMincha, you can already, when you count the new day that perhaps has not yet started, it is a count of the day. It is a count of the day. However, if it's a count of the day, but you do not fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to count it only once nightfall has come. So when you count early, you are counting the day, the next day. Day is considered counting, but you did not fulfill the mitzvah. But if you remember at nightfall to count, then you can count, since earlier you didn't fulfill the mitzvah, even though the day was counted. But since you didn't fulfill the mitzvah, since counting at night is the prerequisite for fulfilling the mitzvah, so you can count over and you can count with a bracha. Earlier in the day, you don't fulfill the mitzvah, so you can't make a bracha. What is gained? Because when you count earlier, and if you forgot later to count at night, since the day is counted, you'll be able to count the next day with a bracha, the night of the next day with a bracha. Now, I want to suggest something perhaps a little different. The Rambam in Perek Zayin of Hilchos Tmidim Musafim, in talking about the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, he mentions a drasha. It's probably one of the medrashim, but other Rishonim also mention it. Rishonim before the Rambam and Rishonim after the Rambam mention it. But we do not have, at least that I'm aware, of a source for this medrash, for this drasha. The Torah tells us that Sefiras HaOmer comes, that the let me just get the Chumash. Shiva Shavuos Tisparlach Mechalchel Chamish Bakama. You shall count 7 weeks for yourself when the sickle is first put to the standing crop. So, in other words, what initiates the mitzvah Sefiras HaOmer today? Obviously, that's not the case. But when in time, when they would count, when they would cut when they would cut the barley crop, when they would cut the barley crop for the mitzvah of the carbon omer, for the sacrifice of the omer. So you shall count 7 weeks for yourself, and when the sickle is first put to the standing crop, you shall begin counting 7 weeks. So the drush is, don't say bakama when it's standing, but bikuma, when you are standing, count. So there is a special halacha. Again, we do not know the source of this halacha, but the Rishonim quoted that when you count Sefiras HaOmer, you have to count Sefiras HaOmer. You have to count the Sefiras HaOmer in a state of standing. Okay, but the question is why? And in all probability, was it the Rabbanon? This is an asmachta. So the question is, and even if it's a regular drasha, there's probably a reason why Sefiras HaOmer has to be counted when you are standing, in a state of standing. Now, I think, now the Torah tells us, and I've discussed it before, but I'm going to add something. Torah tells us that Moshe, when Abraham Avinu was taking Yitzchak to the Akedah, taking him to be bound on the Mizbeach, to be sacrificed on the altar. And they're traveling, and and Torah tells us, Vayhi bayom hashlishi, it was on the third day. Vayares hamakom merachok. He saw the place, Hara Moriah. He saw from afar. And Torah tells us he then turned to his servants who accompanied him on the road. And the Medrash says, who were his servants? His servants were Yishmael and Eliezer. And he said to them, do you see anything? So the Medrash says, Ma roah, what did Avram see? He saw Har Noah, he saw a beautiful mountain. V'anan kashor eleha, and there was a heavenly cloud attached to it. He then turned to his servants, to Yishmael. Yishmael, of course, was a son, but Yishmael was the son of a maidservant, Hagar. So he had, to a certain degree, a servile perspective that he received from his mother. And he talked to Eliezer, who, although was Moshe bebeso, he was in charge of Avram's household. And Avram entrusted him with so many things. But he also had a servile perspective. That's why Yitzchak could not marry Eliezer's daughter. And he turned to them and he said, what do you see? And they said, we don't see anything. He turned to Yitzchak, actually a little beforehand, and he said to Yitzchak, what do you see? And Yitzchak said that he saw the same thing that Avram saw. Har Noah, he saw a beautiful mountain. V'anan kashor aleha, and there was a heavenly cloud attached to it. So he turned to his servants. He said, me and Yitzchak, we saw something special. But you, Eliezer, you, Yishmael, who have a servant perspective, you didn't see anything. And the chamor, the donkey, also didn't see anything. Shvu lechem poem chamor. Sit here with the donkey. Ani v'hanar, and I and Yitzchak nelchat ko v'nishtacheh nashuv aleichem. Me and Yitzchak alone will go to the site of Har Moriah, which ultimately was the site of the temple. And we will bow to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We will serve God. And then we will return to you. And the Das Kenim about Tosfos adds one sentence. And that's why he says, our sages say that slaves are Am Hadom Lechamor, a nation that is compared to donkeys. And in saying, even though the Gemara learns it out a little differently, a nation that is compared to donkeys in the sense that he says that they don't have pedigree. The law is that servants and slaves, they don't have pedigree. Their children are not halachically considered fully their children. And the parents are not considered their parents. And the question is, what is the connection between this whole episode of Avram seeing the mountain from afar, of seeing the heavenly cloud attached to it, and Yitzchak also, and them not seeing anything, and servants and slaves not having a halachic status of pedigree, of linkage of the generations. But I think it's very interesting when you take a look at Yishmael, when you take a look at Eliezer. Eliezer is on a extremely high level. He's entrusted almost with getting a wife. He's trusted with getting a wife. Of course, he's given very strict instructions. A wife for Yitzchak. Avram trusts him. He has miracles that take place, Kfitzas HaDerech. But at the same time, our sages tell us his daughter could not be the wife of Yitzchak. Why? Because when you have, what is pedigree? Pedigree is the linkage between past, present, and future. Pedigree attaches one generation to its parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, and the other hand, it attaches it to its children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. A slave, in order to have pedigree, you have to have a sense for the past and you have to have a sense for the future. A slave, that's part of the servile perspective. A slave knows only now. The present. He could be sold away at any moment from his masters to the other masters. And in doing so, he sold away from his parents. He sold away from his children. They only know the fleeting moment of the present. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, Avdei Hasman, Heim Avadim La'avadim. The slaves of time are the slaves of slaves. Avdei Hashem, but the servants of God, they're completely free. To be a slave of time is to be limited by the limitations that time places upon us. But to be truly free, to be a true servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you have to have a sense, you have to connect the past, use the present to connect the past with the future. The daughter of Eliezer, brought up in that tent of Avram, in the camp of Avram. She was a very fine person, but she didn't have a sense for the future. And probably to a large degree, did not have the sense of the past either. But to be a mother of the Jewish people, to be the wife of Yitzchak, you have to have a sense for the future. When they saw the Shekhinah, when they saw the presence of God, the heavenly cloud that was attached, they didn't just see it while it was right in front of them, but they saw it from afar. We're going this week. We're going to read Doz Yasher, where there was revelation. And the Torah tells us, the Chazal tell us, our sages tell us, Rasa Shivcha Ayam, the maidservant of the sea, saw Mashallah Yecheskel ben Buzi, saw more his galus, more revelation than Yecheskel, than Prophet Yecheskel. And the question is, what happened to the maidservant at the sea? The answer is, and it could be the maidservant might have been the Jewish maidservants who were just getting away from being slaves. So to a large degree, they had a servile perspective also, which they had to rid themselves of. So they saw this hisgalos, they saw this revelation of God's presence. But they weren't able to take it with them. And they're constantly rebelling in the desert. Why? Because they had a servile perspective. And a slave only has the perspective of the present. Is not able fully to have a sense for the future. Not able to vayaras hamakom eracho, to see the place from afar. Abraham and Yitzchak, they were able to see his galus Shechina, not just when it was in front of them, but when it was from afar. They would see his galus Shechina when it was afar. And when the Jewish people traversed the desert, so they were going to Har Sinai. And what is Sefiras HaOmer? What does Sefiras HaOmer represent? It represents the Jewish people going from Egypt to Mount Sinai. And part of it, they counted the days. And that's why we count Sefiras HaOmer, to re-experience the going to Mount Sinai. But when they counted the days, part of the reason for counting the days, in other words, they were trying, they counted the days because they were looking forward to the future. But we find in those days, how many times did they rebel? We could suggest that to a certain degree, the Sefiras HaOmer, we do the Sefiras HaOmer that they counted. But even though they were looking forward, to getting the Torah at Mount Sinai, to being close to God, they weren't able to sense the giving of the Torah. To them, it was just something that they didn't have yet. They were counting the days that they didn't have the Torah. And they were looking forward to getting the Torah. But they couldn't draw inspiration yet. And perhaps that's the idea behind Sefiras HaOmer. The Sefiras HaOmer, the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, perhaps we could suggest, is not just the mitzvah of counting, but counting and looking forward. As we traverse the desert going to Mount Sinai, to be able to sense the presence of God that is there, waiting for us to come there. So this is part, perhaps that's why we stand when we do Sefiras HaOmer. We stand because we are looking forward to Matan Torah. Not only we're looking forward to Matan Torah, to a certain degree, sometimes when you look forward to something, to a certain degree, you are beginning to experience it. You're overtaken with excitement about it. It has an impact on you, even though you didn't arrive there. It's not just that you don't have it, but you're able, in a sense, to experience it as well. So as a tikkun, perhaps, as a tikkun for the rebellion that the Jewish people did throughout their journey to Har Sinai. So as a tikkun for that, we have to, as a tikkun for that, as a tikkun, we stand when we say Sefiras HaOmer, almost like we're standing at Har Sinai, because we're able, we're able to sense the presence of the Shekhinah in the future. And in a sense, this is part of ridding ourselves of the servile perspective. And now, but I think it's more than just that. The looking forward to Har Sinai, and for us, Shavuos represents Har Sinai. Now, there is a shita of the Rabbi. It's a very interesting shita. The Rabbi says that the bracha, when we say the bracha in Sefiras HaOmer, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzibana al Sefiras HaOmer, we don't say Hayom, but we say Shehayom. That today is 40 days. Today is 50 days. The 49 days. That today is 2 days. That today is 3 days. In other words, the bracha is not a bracha on the Sefira, but the Sefira is part of the bracha. So we say the bracha of Sefiras HaOmer, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al Sefiras HaOmer, Shehayom, that today is the second day of Sefira, the third day of Sefira, the fourth day of Sefira. So usually by mitzvahs, you have a bracha that's on the mitzvah. But you have mitzvahs that the mitzvah is performed as part of a bracha. Let's say Kiddush. When we make a bracha, we're not making a bracha on the Kiddush. The Kiddush is recited as part of a bracha. But when we take a lulav, the bracha is on the mitzvah of lulav. So the Sefiras HaOmer, according to the Rabbi, and even my uncle pointed out that according to the Mechaber, it seems that even though his nusach habracha is Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al Sefiras HaOmer, and not Sheh, Hayom, Shnei Yamim B'Omer, Hayom Shlosha Yamim B'Omer. Nevertheless, it's part of the bracha also, because the Mechaber says Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvosav v'tzivanu al Sefiras HaOmer, Hayom Shnei Yamim, doesn't add B'Omer. So it's only because it's part of the bracha that, in a sense, that it's counted as part of the Sefira. So in a sense, even according to, so even if you have the bracha, you don't say Sheh, but it still it could be considered as part of the bracha. Now we have to understand, why is it that the Chachamim instituted that Sefiras HaOmer should be recited, according to the Rabbi's opinion, as part of a bracha? Why is it that way? I think we could understand it with something I think I once saw in the Sefer Agudah. The Sefer Agudah asks a question. The question that Rashi, Tosfos, all the Rishonim ask. On one hand, in regard to Sefiras HaOmer, we say Sheva Shavuos Tispolah. You have to count 7 days. 7 weeks, excuse me, you have to count 7 weeks. 7 weeks is 49 days. On the other hand, we talk about counting 50 days. So Rashi and Tosfos all suggest all kinds of answers. The Sefer Agudah says that when you make Kiddush, Shavuos night, and you say Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, So when you make Kiddush and you say Chag HaShavuos Hazeh, so that's the 50th day. So in a certain sense, the Kiddush of Shavuos is attached to the Sefiras HaOmer. It's the culmination of the Sefiras HaOmer. And in a sense, Shavuos is the holiday that commemorates the Jewish people standing at Mount Sinai, of Kervanu Lefnei Har Sinai, of seeing revelation. We could suggest that the reason the Chachamim instituted that Sefiras, according to the Rabbi, that the bracha of that Sefiras HaOmer should be fulfilled as part of a bracha, not just to have a bracha on it, as most mitzvahs are, but as part of a bracha like Kiddush, is to identify it with Kiddush. Because Kiddush on Shavuos, in a sense, is when we Mekadesh Shavuos, Zman Matan Toraseinu. In a sense, we are re-experiencing the giving of the Torah, the standing before Mount Sinai. But it's not enough to experience the giving of the Torah, to experience revelation when we're standing there, when it's happening. But we have to, we have to be able to experience Matan Torah and revelation even from afar. Perhaps that's why, in order that we should see the sphere itself as a semi-form of Shavuos, that the Chachamim instituted a bracha. They instituted the bracha because of the connection between the Sefira and Kiddush. And the Kiddush of Shavuos night is talking about the holiday that commemorates and causes us to re-experience Matan Torah and revelation. And we could suggest that this is the Shita of Rashi also. And of course, that's why we stand during Sefiras HaOmer. We stand during Sefiras HaOmer because at Mount Sinai, the Jewish people stood. And we could say that according to Rashi's opinion, actually Rashi might agree that technically you could fulfill the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, you could fulfill the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer early. But there is a special takonas chachamim in order to enable us to fulfill the mandate of Vayaras Hamakom Meirachok, in order to experience seeing the Shekhinah from afar, in order to do a tikkun for the rebellions that the Jewish people did on their way to Har Sinai, when they still had that servile perspective. So the Chachamim, just like that we should stand in order to experience Mount Sinai, the Chachamim instituted to identify it with Kabbalah Torah, with the getting of the Torah, with the Sinai experience. So it should be recited as part of a bracha, just like Kiddush. And because it's identified with the Kiddush of Shavuos, and we know that there is a custom, and it could be it's a halacha also, that you can only make Kiddush after 7 complete weeks have passed by. So the bracha. So in other words, you have to wait. You have to wait for the nightfall of Shavuos. Even if you want to accept Shavuos early. But Kiddush cannot be recited until the nightfall of Shavuos. According to the Shita of the Aguda, would follow that way. Because the 50th day of Sefira, that is fulfilled through the recitation of Kiddush. So we could say, since you had to wait for nightfall, for Shavuos, to identify the bracha of Sefiras HaOmer with the Kiddush of Shavuos, the Chachamim, when they instituted that the Sefiras HaOmer should be recited through a bracha, they said it has to be at the nightfall also, in order to identify it with the bracha, with the Kiddush of Shavuos. And we could suggest, but like many mitzvos, as the Levush says, like many mitzvos, they could be performed after Plaga Mincha, Sefiras HaOmer, and the Das Kenim, the Piskat Tosfos and Menachos says it explicitly, that the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer could also be performed earlier. But in other words, in addition to the mitzvah of Sefiras HaOmer, of counting the days after leaving Egypt, there is a mitzvah of using the Sefira to, in a sense, experience coming closer to Har Sinai. You could see Sefiras HaOmer from a double perspective. You're counting the days since you left Egypt. And you're counting the days getting closer to Shavuos. And the reason we count it in terms of the past, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, is because we're counting the days in a sense that help prepare us for the receiving of the Torah, to rid ourselves of that servile perspective. So Sefiras HaOmer, on one hand, is counting the days from the leaving of Egypt. On the other hand, it's counting the days as we're getting closer to Matan Torah. So the Chachamim instituted a special bracha to emphasize the seeing of Sefiras HaOmer from that perspective, from the perspective of identifying the Sefiras HaOmer with the receiving of the Torah. But I think there is another point, and that is that when you take a look at the Jewish people in the Midbar, in the desert, when they're going to receive the Torah, what is it that the Jewish people are when they're going to receive the Torah? What is it that the Jewish people are? Where do we see? What is their problem? Why is it that they rebel so much? And in 2 places, it says they didn't have water. And also, they were tired out, worn out because of the road and because of thirst. And when the Jewish people would look back and not look forward, that contributed to this sense of tiredness. And the tikkun is to look forward to Matan Torah, to look to the future. when they weren't looking at their goal. So it was just a long journey, a tired journey, a journey of thirst. And Chazal say that's because of this, that they instituted Kriyas HaTorah. In other words, Ein Mayim Ela Torah. We have to use Torah in a sense to experience. Reading Torah is part of the experiencing of Matan Torah. They had certain parshios even before they came to Har Sinai. And to read these parshios gave them the experience of reading the Torah. So of Kabbalas HaTorah. And in a sense, that gave them strength. It renewed their strength. It made them feel a person. When the Torah tells us about Avraham Avinu, that Avraham was a master of time. Avram Zaken Baba Yomim. He was elderly, coming in days. You have people that are just elderly, they pass through time. And you have people that take their days with them. They get elderly and they take their days with them. They're masters of time. They don't leave time behind them. They take their past experiences with them. And Avram Avinu, when he so the Jewish people, they only had that day that they were there. They didn't look forward. They didn't look to the future at all. They didn't understand the idea of taking the past into the future, of connecting past, present, and future, because they had that servile perspective. So in a sense, there was a sense of tiredness, of something that's identified with becoming elderly, with a lack of strength. But had they had the proper attitude, looking forward to Matan Torah, it wouldn't have been a ba'atoye v'yageya. There would have been a burst of strength, looking forward to the future, deriving spiritual inspiration for the future. But they only saw what was in front of them, and they only saw the slavery by itself that was behind them. They didn't connect the slavery to Matan Torah, the idea of turning the service to Paro into the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And to a certain degree, even in the present, they serve just as servants, slaves of Paro. Mentally, they were slaves of Paro. So the idea of idea of going close to Har Sinai is one of having additional strength, in a sense, renewing your strength. The Baal HaTanya said that Pesach represents the youth of the Jew. Shavuos, the bar mitzvah of the Jew. The Sukkos, the elderly years of the Jew, the maturity of the Jew. We have to have all elements at one time. We have to have the strength of youthfulness, the maturity of elderly years. And we have to have the idea of accepting the Torah, of saying Naaseh and Ishma, as it's demonstrated by Shavuos. So we have to put all together. So we, together with nature, renew ourselves. But in renewing ourselves, we have to maintain the maturity that we have from our past experiences. So I think that this is the idea of this is the idea of Sefiras HaOmer. The idea of Sefiras HaOmer, the Mishknei Yaakov says it mentions that there is a machlokas by tefillin shel yad in the Zohar, where the tefillin shel yad is gvura, represents gvura, strength, or tefillin shel yad represents malchus. And he says if it represents strength, so you have to stand when you put on tefillin shel yad. But if it represents malchus, you sit, because malchus is identified with a throne, with sitting. So we have to understand that the idea of Sefiras HaOmer, it's a tikkun on the tiredness, the tired attitude the Jewish people had when they went in the Midbar on the way to Har Sinai. So we have to renew our strength, and that is the symbol of Gvura. And Gvura is identified with standing. Consequently, there was a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah of standing. There's a mitzvah of standing when we count Sefira, because part of the idea of Sefira is renewing our strength and dedicating our strength to Avodas HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to the Torah. And I just want to say, I know it's late, but I just want to say about my uncle, that my uncle once in one of his shiurim, he said, when he was elderly already, he said, he comes into the shiur room. He said, he's old, he's elderly, he feels without strength. But then he gives the shiur, and his strength is renewed. He becomes like a young person again. But it's more than that. It's not only that my uncle's Torah renewed him. My uncle's Torah renewed generations and will continue to renew generations. It's not just Torah. Somehow, when you learn my uncle's Torah, you feel renewed strength. You cease to be tired. It draws your interest. And not only it renews his interest, but his Talmidim and his Talmidim's Talmidim, and it just continues. And there's a difference between my uncle and some of the past generations of the Rosh Yeshivas. I remember as a boy, and I was more or less born shortly after World War II. And many of the Rebbeim at that time were students of the Rosh Yeshivas, great Rosh Yeshivas of Europe. And because of that, the Torah of those Rosh Yeshivas were heard time and time again, whenever you walked into a Beis Medrash. But as time passed, and the generation of the Talmidim passed away, somehow you don't hear that Torah so much anymore. I'm not, chas v'shalom, not taking away from them. Perhaps that Torah was said in a different milieu, in a different situation. But the interesting thing about my uncle's Torah, that his Torah today is learned more as each day passes by. His Torah renewed not only his strength, but his Torah renews the strength of future generations. And it's, as it seems, it will continue to renew the strength of future generations. In other words, my uncle understood this idea of Torah renewing our strength. He had Malchus. He had an impact on world Jewry. So many people came closer to Torah because of him. But he also had Gvura. Torah gave him Gvura. And in a sense, we could say that he still lives. And not only he lives now, but he continues to live with strength, with youthfulness, because his Torah imbues strength of Torah into the future generations as well. Okay.
Thank you. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Is counting Sefira one mitzvah that lasts 7 weeks? If it is, then why do we make a bracha every day?
No, so that's the way the Mishnah Berurah assumes, that it's 1 week. But my uncle, my father, felt that no, each day is a separate mitzvah. What we could say, according to the Shita, that it's 1 week, that one mitzvah, all 49 days. So it's not a bracha on the mitzvah. If there'd been a bracha on only a bracha on the mitzvah, then you're right. It should be only one bracha. But if the Sefira is part of a bracha, so it's not a birchas mitzvah, it's like Kiddush, as I said in the shir. Since it's like Kiddush, each day we have to say it as part of the bracha.
Have you seen the latest issue of Tradition for the Rab's Yahrzeit?
No, I didn't.